Your question is interesting in historical context. 40 years ago this year, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The SALT II Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty of that era, was before the Senate for ratification, and the invasion of Afghanistan killed the chances of ratification. The treaty was never ratified. I would think it's safe to say that if Russia were to invade Georgia before the New START follow-on treaty were ratified, it would not be ratified. If, on the other hand, it is ratified and the treaty enters into force, and Russia were to invade Georgia after that, I doubt the U.S. would pull out of the treaty. But the politics of ratification, as both of our speakers have indicated, can be an important issue. The priority that President Obama has given to a nuclear-free world has been important in the domestic context in the United States and also in dealing with some of our allies and publics in Western Europe, where there is some support for that. In the joint understanding that Presidents Medvedev and Obama signed on July 6 in Moscow, there was no mention of nuclear-free world or the START follow-on treaty being a milestone toward a nuclear-free world. Yet that's the way it has often been presented in the domestic context. Do you think the Russians see the idea of a nuclear-free world as just a naive hope in which some leaders in the West are pandering to their liberal supporters? Or do you think the Russians see the idea of a nuclear-free world as directly contrary to their interests because they view that nuclear weapons are the most important reason why they can make a claim to superpower status?
Well, I think they have both views, actually. And if you look at the sort of nuclear-free world rhetoric, it generally is brought forward without much consideration of the overarching international strategic environment. So it becomes very difficult to see how we get from here to there and improve international security by doing so. That's one argument also that the Russians would make. The second one is that they see nuclear weapons really as the guarantor of their security, not only against us, by the way, but against China as well. And we should never forget that, because the Russian Far East can only be defended against China as far as Russia is concerned by nuclear weapons. Not that they expect a Chinese attack anytime soon, but again, it's there to deter anybody from thinking that they can coerce Russia. So they see nuclear weapons not only, by the way, as defending Russia, but as preventing NATO or other powers from interfering in what the Russians call the near abroad, or used to call the near abroad, the CIS. It is repeated over and over again in the Russian media that one of the reasons the Russians were able to move on Georgia last year is precisely because Russia has nuclear weapons and could deter any threat by the West to intervene in Georgia. So from the Russian point of view, pushing for a nuclear-free world, particularly as their conventional forces are in such bad shape, is not only naive, it's dangerous as far as they're concerned.
I think in the Russian government and in the U.S. government, there is a pretty solid consensus that a nuclear weapons-free world, because just to make a pedantic point, I don't think any of us are really talking about a nuclear-free world. We're all big fans of our nuclear power plants. But I think most of the people in the policy community, in the elite community that thinks about this, sees a nuclear weapons-free world as a long way down the road. The United States, which, one could make a decent case for not really needing its nuclear weapons because our conventional superiority against everyone is so great that Russia is scared of our conventional capability, and Russia is the only country that could match us for nuclear weapons. So, why do we need them? There, people have made that case. That case, you could also argue with it, but it can be made. We're not giving them up. We like the security blanket it provides. More importantly, perhaps, our allies and friends like the security blanket it provides. I mean, there's something faith-based about nuclear weapons. But having said that, I think what is going to make a nuclear weapons-free world possible down the road is, sadly enough, the development of conventional weapons capabilities. I think they're just going to become less interesting and less frightening because other capabilities will become more interesting and more frightening over time. But I do think that's a long way off.
In December 1987, in the East Room of the White House in Washington, President Reagan and President Gorbachev signed a treaty eliminating intermediate-range nuclear forces between the Soviet Union and the United States. In remarks at the signing ceremony, President Reagan coined the phrase "trust but verify," a phrase that has lived on. In the current situation in Russia, in which since 2000, Russia has steadily become more authoritarian, anti-U.S. rhetoric by state-supported or state-controlled media has gotten stronger. There are increasing efforts to close off access to research materials to outside researchers and other things. So the question of secrecy is becoming more important. In the joint understanding signed by Presidents Obama and Medvedev, there was mention that there would be verification and transparency measures. In the White House fact sheet accompanying that, the phrase effective verification was used. It was not used in the joint understanding. In the U.S. political context, and certainly in the context of Senate ratification of past agreements, effective verification has been an important criterion with political salience. Do you see that verification could be a challenge with the START-follow-on agreement?
I don't think that verification will be a challenge. There's no doubt that Russian views as to what is effective verification and American views of effective verification differ, but they cannot. But they can be negotiated in ways that both sides agree to it, because we've already had the experience of doing verification and transparency measures that both sides have accepted. Both sides want a looser regime than was the case with the START Treaty of 1992, which had a very elaborate verification procedure and which is still in effect until December. So I believe that in principle this can be worked out. Now, I don't know that it can be worked out as quickly as everybody would like, because you get into an awful lot of technical details on both sides that require political adjudication from the highest authorities, and that takes time. But when and if this treaty comes up to the Senate, I think that the administration understands that it needs to have a verification chapter or section or protocol of this agreement that the Senate is comfortable with. Otherwise, again, it will have difficulties in ratifying the treaty. And I think the Russians understand that aspect of our domestic politics. And for that matter, there are people on the Russian side who are skeptical about what we're doing. So we have to take that into account as well. So I think this is a question that's out there, but it's not a question that can't be resolved.
I think especially because this is a treaty where Russia will be very interested in verifying effectively what the U.S. is doing. Its dilemma between secrecy and verification will be resolved in favor of verification, though again, as Stephen said, a somewhat lighter protocol than that of the START Treaty. I'd like to make the point that I wouldn't link Russian tendencies towards secrecy on these issues, Russian moves away from democracy, and Russian anti-U.S. feeling together. I actually see these as fairly independent factors. Russian domestic political moves towards a less, towards a system that does not look like a liberal democracy are unquestionable. On the other hand, they're also fairly popular in Russia. So when you look at authoritarianism, when you consider how the Russian government works, when you consider how the Russian public responds, it's a fascinating thing to unpack and understand. But I do think, aside from this fear that the United States is trying to export democracy so as to undermine the government, which, if it is trying to export democracy, it is to an extent trying to at least undermine the way the government increasingly works, so they have a point. The anti-U.S. feeling is somewhat separate from that. The anti-U.S. feeling also comes from, this sense that this is the biggest bully on the block,